dignitaries. Well, the inaugural session that has really, in a way, I'll say they had put everything in order. What are the challenges and what is the way forward? But I'm sure if we look at the challenge of climate change and that the global average temperatures, they must be kept below 1.5 degrees ideally, and really speaking, if it crosses 2 degrees, it's really going to be difficult for the humankind to survive over here. And we are already at the level of approximately 1.15 degrees increase. So therefore, the leverage, what is remaining is very little. We predicted IPCC reports that gave us a fair idea, and maybe a decade ago we were talking about that climate change is a threat. But today we don't have to convince everyone. Everyone knows it's a reality, and we also realize, and rather the term save the planet is getting changed to save human race, because planet will do very well without us, I suppose, but it's the humans who are going to suffer the most. And we have already started seeing the bad effects of climate change, and really speaking at the global level. Of course, it is the risk-taking capacity of the southern part, the developing countries, is very low compared to, I should say, the developed economies. If there is a flood in United States and people suffer, maybe it will be 1 to 2% of their savings. But if it occurs in India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, all these countries, there it is not their entire savings gone. It is perhaps their next generation is going to suffer because they'll have no money to send their children to school and afford health care and so on. So it is, therefore, the impact of climate change is going to be worse in terms of risk-taking capacity. The other fact, unfortunately, which is also there, is that the certain, when we talk of South and North divide, it is also that the countries which are already in a way struggling in terms of making the two ends meet, whether it is food productivity, whether it is natural resources which are available to them, they are going to be worse impacted. And really speaking, what is happening today, they have not contributed to the increase in temperature which has already occurred. So really speaking, the problem arose somewhere else, but it is the developing or those who have not contributed anything are the ones which are going to suffer the most. So that's the tragic part of it. But the thing is, let's stop the blame game. It is not who has done what. It is that what is the harsh reality today. And what is the way out? And I always believe there is no problem for which you can't find an answer. Now the answer lies is that we have to go for green growth. It goes without saying, development has to take place. Developing countries, and maybe we need a world in next few years, and that is what SDGs are, that you are working towards a planet where no one is hungry, no one is poor, you have healthcare access to everyone, and so on. So you want to reduce the inequalities which are existing today. The other, and therefore, development is going to be the key word. Now, when we talk of development, and then it is that because some of these countries, they are so popular in terms of population pressure, it is so high, and therefore, when you say per capita energy usage, per capita natural resource availability, it is on the lower side. But if we look at, because our density, population density is so high, what is the pressure in terms of per kilometer area? So whether it is water usage, whether it is GHG emissions, then they are not really, I should say that maybe sometimes it's even higher than the developed part of the world. So the challenges in the two parts are totally different. Now, good part is that technologies, over a period of time, everyone has is becoming conscious that we need to go green. The myth that green is expensive is also gone. because if we look at even in India, the price of solar energy is lower than what you get from the coal-fired plants. So renewable doesn't mean it's expensive. And if we look at what is the enabling environment, and I'll say that our Honorable Prime Minister had put things in order, because the moment there is commitment from the government side in platform of COP26, it was very well said that we are going to increase our share of renewables almost 50% by 2030, and by 2070 we are going to be net zero. So that essentially it's a signal, because the industry also knows that they need to invest in greener technologies. What is voluntary today may become, in a way, mandatory tomorrow. And it should, really speaking, because you can actually do it, so why not? And the other is that because India and many other countries in the south, they are blessed with solar energy, and therefore they can easily move towards renewables far more easily than or rather the energy cost is going to come down for them drastically. Even today, it's almost double the cost of solar production in Germany than in India. So therefore, we can become the exporter of energy as well. The other good part, and of course, Dr. Mathur mentioned about few things, and one was that there should be pool of IPRs. That's something very important. And I always feel that let's look into our countries not as receivers of the technology, but co-developer of the technologies. We have best of the talent, I should say very innovative minds, very hardworking, and more than anything else, I should say that sustainability is engraved in our DNA. So therefore, the question which was asked about solar, perhaps if we are making solar panels, or countries like India, if we are into making any of these renewable technology equipment, the very first thing in mind will be how will I recycle? And therefore, how do I be able to take out the rare elements or whatever is expensive going into this particular piece of equipment? So let's look, and also ultimately, because we are cost conscious, we will make, the cost of equipment is going to come down the moment scientists from these economies are involved in co-developing the technology. The other part is the technology for large companies, and what the developed part of the country requires perhaps is little different from our countries, because we also have to ensure there is employment generation. We don't want, at the cost of human resource, technology going very expensive. So co-development of the technology definitely remains there. The other part I would like to mention, and of course Ambassador Swane has gone, I think he's not here, but what he mentioned about sharing of the technology, I would like to acknowledge that that's also becoming a reality. Like we are working, Terry has established National Center of Excellence on Green Ports and Shipping. So Dutch government on their own, they are sending a scientist who will be assisting in the technical part. So that is the kind of collaboration one requires, and that is actually coming on the table. So we are very happy that the developed part is also realizing that there is something over and above finance, and that is technological sharing and co-development of the technology. So I won't take more time, and of course, as more discussions take place, I'll take freedom of indulging if required, and I do look forward to a very interesting session. So thank you. So may I invite the first speaker? Yeah.
Good afternoon.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. Dr. Chair Lady, my panel, my fellow panelists, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. To begin with, may I take this opportunity to congratulate the organizer on his or her acumen in selecting such a theme today. This is a very good theme, but not easy to handle, I must say. Nonetheless, ladies and gentlemen, we are all here to share the same intention, that is to show our solidarity on one hand, and on the other hand, we are here to exchange our knowledge and information in addressing the global challenge. Indeed, the term sustainable development has been abuzz across the world in recent years. The near catastrophic level of global warming has dawned upon us that humanity has to strike the right balance between environmental protection and economic development in pursuit of our well-being for our people. And these dimensions constitute the three key pillars of sustainable development. Nonetheless, ladies and gentlemen, taking cognizance of the common existential threats confronting humanity does not seem to have arrested the ever-widening gulf between ideals and reality. Lack of political will and prevalence of silos mentality have thrown the global aspiration of good governance into tatters. Escalating commitment deficit is now order of the day. Parallel to this, ladies and gentlemen, one of the biggest contributors to unsustainability lies in the misdistribution of wealth. Over a third of the world still live in poverty with limited access to energy, water, and food. Personal wealth is distributed so unevenly across the world that the richest 2% of adults own more than 50% of the world's assets, while the poorest half hold only 1% of the wealth. Ladies and gentlemen, consumption of earthly resources among the nation states is another glaring case in point, where inequitable distribution of global resources is nothing but an elephant in the room. The US consumes 25% of the world's energy with a share of 4.5% of the world population. The figures for material, water, and food consumption between the richest nations and the poorest display a similar level of disparity. Over the decades, population growth has consistently been much higher in the developing global south, while the developed global north remains the major resource consumer and even the major polluter in the world, albeit with its technology advancement. The exponential widening of gap between the ends of the spectrum remains worrisome. Be that as it may, ladies and gentlemen, no single nation state should ever be deprived of its rights to industrial development in its pursuit of economic well-being of its people. Any attempt to scapegoat the developing world for environmental degradation and the consequential climate change is by itself a Trojan, I repeat, a Trojan to justify plans of stifling nascent economic development in the developing world. After all, industrialization is not the monopoly of the industrialized states. The developing global south is in dire need of job creation and revenue generation to alleviate its abject poverty and enhance social development. This could only be delivered by industrialization. To address the escalating global North-South divide, ladies and gentlemen, perhaps the Lima Declaration, adopted by UNIDOS, or United Nations Industrial Development Organization, UNIDO, member states in December 2013, provides a window of opportunity. It set the foundation for a new vision of inclusive and sustainable industrial development, or in short, we call it ISID, in addition to highlighting the role of industrialization as a driver for development. Ladies and gentlemen, let us take a look at ISID, what it is all about. Inclusive and Sustainable Industrial Development, or ISID, is no doubt the primary source of revenue generation. It allows for rapid and sustained increases in living standards for most people and provides the technological solutions to environmentally good industrialization. It is simple knowledge that without technology and innovation, industrialization with enhanced resource and energy efficiency remains a dream. Without industrialization, fiscal development will grind to a halt. This is exactly the conundrum confronting the developing world. On one hand, we notice that there is lack of technology transfer, which generally throttles the nascent sustainable development in these emerging economies. But on the other hand, ladies and gentlemen, the wings of industrialization are further clipped when more stringent rules are imposed by the rich nations in the name of environmental protection. This by itself is a travesty of the inclusiveness desired in the ideal of ISID, or inclusive and sustainable development. In this context, ladies and gentlemen, the word inclusive means industrial development must include all countries and all peoples, as well as the private sector, the civil society organizations, multinational development institutions, and the entire United Nations system. Ideally, equal opportunities and equitable distribution of the benefits of industrialization are to be offered to all stakeholders. While the other keyword, sustainable, addresses the need to decouple the industry's induced prosperity from excessive natural resource use and negative environmental impacts. Hence, ISID portrays an ideal scenario, implying that no one is left behind and all segments of society are to benefit from the industrial progress, which also provides the means for tackling critical social and humanitarian needs. Ladies and gentlemen, but in reality, the polarized world that we are having today is further fragmented day by day with the purported ideological rift that drives wedge within the fabric of social and international cooperation. Parallel to this, deglobalization is now gaining traction amid escalating economic nationalism. Against such a gloomy global backdrop, trust deficit among humanity has soared to an all-time high. Positive exchanges of globally available knowledge and expertise in the face of common existential threats are now stunted when veiled moves of technology decoupling set in under the pretext of national security concerns. Ladies and gentlemen, all in all, the prevailing geopolitical scenario does not bode well at all for international solidarity and cooperation, much worse for bridging the global North-South divide in the sustainable industrialization. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDG, rolled out by the United Nations provide a distinctive agenda for the international community to pursue. In its pursuit of this sustainable well-being of humanity, SDG, ladies and gentlemen, SDG 9 confirms the provisions of Lima Declaration and the relevance of ISID in the new global development architecture. All nation states, wealthy and poor alike, are well aware that the ultimate solution to bridging the global north and south lies in the coordinated harnessing of globally available knowledge, technology, and innovation, as well as capital. These are the few main ingredients that we are yearning for. And certainly I believe that if at all we were to pool our resources together, there shouldn't be any problems that we land ourselves in such a conundrum. Indeed, humanity shares a common destiny in the face of existential challenges. Their interests remain intertwined. Any persistent reluctance and apathy in addressing the divide would only hasten the pace of pushing the world to the point of no return, where no single nation state could ever be spared from the dire fate. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to elaborate further, because what is lacking now and what we are awaiting so far is nothing but action. We need to make it deliverable. And on this note, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. And it's very important that no one is left behind if we really want, I should say, security across borders as well, because gone are the days when people were not aware of what is happening in other parts of the world. And today we exactly know the developments as well as the standard of living in other parts. And therefore, if we want to have a society where there is peace, I suppose we can't afford to. And the other important part remains is that we have to empower every individual, every citizen on this planet, that they are able to contribute as a responsible citizen, and at the same time we don't deprive them of any of their rights, which are basic rights. And I'll say environment, and when we talk of climate change, clean environment is something which is basic right. And as individuals also, we have to leave this planet better than what we inherited. So thank you so much. May I now request Dr. Veena Jha. Would you like? Okay, fine. So we'll first come to Professor Rashid Zaman for his address. Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you, Chair. Distinguished audience, particularly the students, this is very important for you because you are the next generation who are going to deal with these issues which we are talking here today. So what I will do is we are going to hear a lot of technical jargon being used today, which is of course very, very important. But also what needs to be taken into consideration is the fact that there are contradictions within societies, difficulties within societies, and my previous speaker has already pointed this out. But I would like to use Bangladesh as an example to highlight the difficulties which one faces when we talk about bridging the gap and sustainable development. This is again a top priority as far as the government of Bangladesh is concerned. But at the same time, as I said, I think many countries across the world, we are facing these realities and we need to take them into consideration. So if I can master this technology, hopefully I should be able to proceed. Okay, So just a few words of wisdom, points to ponder, and then I will move on. Ms. Nisha has already warned me. I think he knows Bengalis very well. Bengalis tend to talk a lot. So I will try to limit myself within just a few, 5 to 7 minutes. I have a few slides to cover. Hopefully, you will bear with me. I sell here, gentlemen, what the whole world desires, power. Matthew Bolton. The next line, no power is costlier than power. Power here has a double meaning. First, of course, we mean power as energy, and of course, the power to control. So this is what we usually tend to think, that whatever it is, Dr. Ajay Mathur pointed out that nuclear power is very expensive, but still countries go for that. Why? Maybe they're thinking like Thomas Edison, that no power, without having anything, whatever is the cost, it is better to have power. But then again, I bring in Mephistopheles, I bring in Faust, and of course, the two famous lines of Faust. As many of you are aware, this drives me near to desperate distress, such elemental power unharnessed, purposeless. So what do we mean by this? It means that Faust is looking at development, and he is thinking that whatever it is, that has to be done. So power has to be used, nature has to be harnessed, even if it comes at a heavy price. And what is that heavy price, ladies and gentlemen? That price is, of course, humans may ultimately tend to be displaced. There are human costs. And this is what Faust pointed out. Their stubbornness, their opposition ruins my finest acquisition. So what do I mean by this? As you know the story, an elderly couple, they have their farm, they're living a peaceful life, but of course Faust needs it for his development, and therefore he ultimately acquires it. And in the process, this elderly couple is, well, killed. So I start off with this because I want you to understand the contradiction which is there as far as development is concerned. This is something which we need to take into consideration. We are talking about sustainable development, fine, but of course this is something which is at the crux of the problem, and I will tend to highlight on that. So very quickly, Bangladesh. Usually you hear all the horror stories about Bangladesh, but this is something I would like you to understand. With the exception of 1972, this is a country which has experienced 50 years of sustained growth. So at the first, it was like 3.5%, but over the last 2 decades, it has been more than 6%. So you have a country without any negative growth in the last 51 years. So what does that mean? It means that development is the criteria. And of course, when we talk about development, what automatically comes up is, of course, the issue of ensuring development in the long run. So as I have said here, we have independence, which came in 1971, but of course now the priority is to improve the lives of 170 million Bangladeshis, and of course this means that the country's foreign policy has to be geared towards attaining that goal. So development suddenly becomes the crux of our foreign policy. This is something which has to be gained at whatever is the cost. So as long as the sense of progress is there among its millions of people, the despair, the anger, the hunger which is there, the culture of hope will continue to float. 3 things, ladies and gentlemen. Usually when we talk about geopolitics, we tend to think about high politics, war, countries fighting with each other, politics, but there is also another geopolitics, and that is the geopolitics of emotion. We tend to forget this. 3 things are very important: fear, humiliation, and hope. Whenever you have fear, you have humiliation, this automatically leads to conflict. The conflict which we talked about today, what is there in the Middle East, for example, in different parts of the world. But the third geopolitics of emotion is hope. People must have hope, and once they have hope, you can ultimately go forward. So when we talk about Bangladesh, that geopolitics of hope needs to be taken into consideration. And I would like to argue that, of course, the political leaders of Bangladesh, the politicians of Bangladesh, this is something on which they have latched onto. That, okay, whatever it is, this hope ultimately cannot disappear. So let us see what they're doing. So we are seeing changes in Bangladesh. A new reality has dawned over there. I'll be happy to talk about that maybe during the question-answer session. But the important thing is, again, as I pointed out, that development is the key. And diplomacy offers for Bangladesh the objective of how to attain that development. And of course, what plays a very important role over there is, of course, infrastructure development. So in other words, ladies and gentlemen, to cut a lot of slides into one long sentence, is that whenever we talk about Bangladesh, whenever we talk about Bangladesh's foreign policy, infrastructural diplomacy has become a key feature or a key pillar of Bangladesh's foreign policy. So this is what I am arguing, that the problem for Bangladesh is, of course, as again, Dr. Mathur pointed out, the issue of finance. That is, again, something very important. So there is a severe shortage of funds to finance large infrastructure projects, and Bangladesh has achieved that. Its diplomacy is geared towards ensuring that those funds are flowing into Bangladesh, and so the development ultimately takes place. So why this development? Yes, Bangladesh's politics is fractious. Like all politics all over the world, at times it seems chaotic, at times it seems difficult, and maybe at one or two times a bit violent. But whatever it is, the crux of the matter is that the political parties, irrespective of their affiliation, they have realized the importance of infrastructural power, that infrastructure needs to be developed, whatever the cost is. So this means Bangladesh's political leadership, they have this Weltanschauung, which is a German word, I'm sure all of you are aware with it. The worldview of Bangladesh's political elites envisions development as a means through which lives of millions of Bangladeshis will undergo a qualitative transformation. So again, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about the geopolitics of hope. This is something very important, and again, I highlight on this. Let us try to remove ourselves from the traditional geopolitical thinking and take this into consideration. So it affects Bangladesh's foreign ties. The countries, as the country engages the world, it is greatly dependent upon certain domestic inputs, and the leadership's worldview is one of the most important building block of Bangladesh's foreign policy. Building up communications infrastructure and connectivity, which has been embraced by Bangladesh's political leadership, who sees roads, bridges, railway infrastructure more than just material terms. And here I would like to highlight on something. Please remember, ladies and gentlemen, when we look at roads, when we look at bridges, when we look at railways, we tend to see themselves as only infrastructure made of steel and rod and cement, and that is it. I would like to remind you what Nehru pointed out when he built the first dams of India. He pointed out that these are temples, not only infrastructure. You need to think along those lines. Of course, there's a lot of argument about that particular statement, but this is something which we need to consider. So my argument is that whenever we talk about Bangladesh's infrastructure development, remember the political leaders are looking at it through three lenses. So what are those lenses? That these infrastructures can lead to the promise of speed and connectivity, number one. It can lead to the promise of political freedom, number two, and number three, it can lead to the promise of economic prosperity. So these are the three things which our railways, our bridges, our roads ultimately tell us. In fact, also our nuclear power plants, for example, which we are building with the help of Russia, our power plants, which we have signed deals with various countries, even our solar development projects, for example. So these all reflect these three things, that there is a hope for a better and brighter future. The promise of speed and connectivity has to be there, the promise of political freedom has to be there, and the promise of economic prosperity has to be there. So why is this so important? Because in a deltaic country like Bangladesh, travel historically has always been slow and difficult and often dangerous. So what do the roads offer us? What do the bridges offer us? They offer us speed, which more than anything else is required, because this is ultimately the road to the future. So again, this is what I ultimately try to argue over here, that better communication systems in the shape of highways, bridges, and railways provide means of overcoming the history of inequality and exploitation brought about by limited or physical mobility, social and physical mobility of peasant communities. So again, ladies and gentlemen, speed here, development here simply is not in terms of acceleration. It means transforming a society. Villages which have no future, who do not think about what is there beyond the horizon or across the other hill, these societies are now given hope through what? Through your infrastructure. So they now see that I can change my future, my limited physical and social mobility, which had hindered me in the past, I can now go forward as a result of this. So this is something very important. So improved connectivity offers the prospect of bridging regional geographical, socio-economic gaps between centrally located elites and different communities located in the regional periphery. So the difference between Dhaka and the rest of the country, the difference between Delhi and the rest of India, this is something which ultimately needs to be taken into consideration. The second issue is, of course, this leads to political freedom. Again, this is something which we seldom talk about. Political freedom in the sense that, just let me go back a bit. I think I've missed it. Okay, so again, the three promises, we'll stick on to that. So again, the second promise is, of course, it leads to political freedom. Once you have economic freedom, that ultimately leads to political freedom. People tend to have economic choices, and as a result of these economic choices, they tend to make political decisions. The classic example of this is the social transformation which is taking place in Bangladesh right now. Our social indicators are improving, as a result of which more and more women empowerment has taken place. Society is undergoing a transformation. It is very difficult for someone sitting outside of Bangladesh to understand the social revolution which has taken place within the country. And of course, the third is, as I pointed out, it also leads to economic prosperity. But I will end here, ladies and gentlemen, with this dilemma. And I want you to understand this dilemma because we are talking about bridging the gap. But what has been the price of this development? The price of this development has been, of course, that there is a lot of pollution going on. And this is not something which is a uniquely Bangladeshi phenomena. Let me refer to a report which came out in 1921, which is called the Bentley Report, very famous report by an English engineer who was then the chief engineer for the Eastern Bengal and Assam railways. Bentley pointed out in his groundbreaking report that there is a problem. When you're looking at railways, roads, and embankments in a country like Bengal at that time, which is of course deltaic, what it happens is that the rivers are flowing from the north to the south. But you are building railways and roads which are connecting towards Calcutta, for example, and to the rest of India, but these are on a east-west axis. So you can understand, north-south, east-west. So what happens is that the flow of rivers, the flow of waters, that is being affected. So Bentley was arguing that why don't you go for sustainable development, build the roads and embankments alongside rivers in such a manner so that this river flow, this water flow is not affected. This is what I'm referring to. So the problem right now which we are facing in Bangladesh is that yes, development is coming, and as a result of this development, you have high economic growth, you have sustained economic growth, as a result of which, please remember, 170 million people when Bangladesh became independent in 1971, and 85% of that people lived below the poverty line. Today, the population of Bangladesh is 170 million, and 20% of that people live below the poverty line. A huge development. Of course, that doesn't mean that we should be complacent, but it of course means that massive development has taken place. But it has come at a heavy environmental price. And that is why I referred to the points which I made at the very beginning of the lecture. What do? Do we proceed like Faust? And of course, go for, as Thomas Edison pointed out, that no power is costlier than no power? Or do we look at sustainable development? So I end this presentation with one very important consideration. The slides are all there. I'll be happy to share them with you. I am arguing that what Bangladesh law needs to do is that it needs to go for a policy where instead of a whole government approach, where all the machinery of the government, all the ministries of the government, they are mobilized to go for sustainable development. Industries are asked to go for sustainable development. We must have a whole society approach for dealing with environmental issues. So the whole question of sustainability is not only a north-south issue, ladies and gentlemen. It is also about looking at ourselves in the mirror and saying that our society needs to take this reality into consideration. Case study Bangladesh, the problem which we are facing in Bangladesh right now, and we need to adopt policies whereby the entire society realizes that there has to be development, but that development has to be green development. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for listening to me.
Thank you, Professor, for taking us the journey of Bangladesh. And in fact, that's one country which has always impressed me. When we are talking about agriculture and the productivity per unit area in Bangladesh is far greater than what we are able to achieve in India. And also the shallow tubewell program, which is highly impressive because food is something you always require. And you just mentioned in the end about that it should not be just left to the government, it should not be left to private sector. It should actually become a sort of movement. And you're absolutely right that we have to see ourselves, what are we doing? And I was I'll cite one example, and I was talking to someone, and I simply said that it is the developed part of the world which perhaps had put us in problem. And the answer I got, and very right one, was that if you look at yourself, and he was pointing at me, perhaps your emissions are far greater than many of the citizens in the developed part of the world. So let's not say that they are to be blamed, it is each one of us. And that is what I like to remind you, the Mission Life, the program by the Honorable Prime Minister. So that is essentially lifestyle for environment. So let's look into it. And if, in a way, if we start looking at, perhaps we close our eyes and we say that it's not going to make a difference if I'm doing something differently. And I'll cite few examples, and that's just as thought-provoking. When we all drive either two-wheelers or four-wheelers, how many times have we really gone for unleaded petrol? We all know there is difference, but we say, perhaps my driving a car is not going to make a difference. How many clothes do we have? Almirahs full of it. Do we really require? And COVID has taught us you can do with, I think, one dress will last at least 3 months. So you don't require more than 4 dresses in a year. But I think we all buy lots of it without thinking that that also leads to GHG emissions. And of course, it also goes without saying that you also want economy to grow, so you don't want that there should be no manufacturing and so on. So therefore, it is a sort of balance that we have to draw, somewhere in between, somewhere looking at, can I be little more green at least? How much am I saving? What is it that the country can afford if each one of us live that way? And definitely, you are absolutely right. It is the steps which all of us are making, and I think there is also a need to share our good experiences. So wherever the successes are, I suppose those are to be advertised, and we all have to learn from each other rather than reinventing a broken wheel. So let's try to complete the wheel and start running, sort of. And of course, nothing is going to be perfect. We are evolving, and perfection will come over it, or it will never come, because that will be the end of universe. We always have to strive for betterment and betterment. So over to you, Veena ji.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. This is the last session, so I have an advantage. I'll try not to repeat what the others have said, but at the same time, you must be suffering from some fatigue. So I'll try to keep it short and pointed. The topic given to me was solutions to the economic growth and sustainable development for the global south. So I'll stick to solutions only, but I have to outline the problem. And I'll not repeat what the others have said, because a lot has been said on sustainable energy, renewable energy, the fact that it is polluting, the fact that we have a north-south issue, the fact that there are equity issues. I'll not dwell so much on them, but I'll talk about something which has not been talked about so far, and that's sustainable agriculture. And what are the north-south issues in sustainable agriculture, and what needs to be resolved? Should I just... Okay, next slides. It's not here? It's not loaded? Okay. Just use this one.
So if you use this...
Yeah. Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you so much. Thank you. This is one of the problems of aging. You become a little technologically inadept. So, okay, so the need for sustainable development is the main issue over here. But at the same time, the overexploitation of, it's switched off. Okay. Switched off, okay. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay, great. So the basic issue that arises with increasing growth is that there is an overexploitation of natural resources. For example, and these are only examples, for example, 1 million species, they are on track for extinction. The decline of more than 60% of the world's marine resources. Food production needs to double to keep pace over the next 40 years, at a time when 23% of the world's agricultural land has been degraded. So we are living through a very difficult time. One, there is a scarcity of resources. Climate change poses a very big threat to our growth levels, and we are also going into a situation of water scarcity. So we're living in very challenging times where growth itself has become a real challenge. It's not possible to grow at the same rate as the countries before us have grown. Okay. So the focus of the present, what's happening? Okay, okay, okay. Okay. So the focus of the presentation is that climate change is posing a major challenge for food security. So growth decoupling with climate change has to take place. What do we do for that? And the solutions that I have proposed, and I'm not saying these are the universal solutions, but we have to narrow down on some solutions only. The solutions I have proposed are promoting sustainable agriculture and promoting renewable energy. I'm not going to focus on promoting renewable energy at all in this presentation because we've spoken a lot about it. I'll talk about one or two solutions at the end. Next slide, please. Next slide, please, yeah. So what is sustainable agriculture? Sustainable agriculture is the ability to meet society's current and future needs for the future generations with the resources we have. And what does this include? It includes a healthy environment, economic profitability, and social and economic equity. For populations which are already deprived of food, if we tell them that eat less, it doesn't make sense. So we have to have the element of equity in this. And also growers have to promote soil health, minimize water use, and lower pollution levels on the farm. One of the major pollutants, unlike what you may think, is actually methane, which comes from animal husbandry on the farms. And this has become a major issue, especially in the north, but also in Argentina and many other big Africa as well. This is becoming a very big issue. So consumers and retailers have to choose food which is grown sustainably. And sustainable agriculture is not merely a physical thing, it's also a matter of negotiation. This is one thing that has to be understood about sustainable development, that sustainable development is not merely a physical aspect, it's a matter of negotiation. Negotiation between the North and South, negotiation between government policies and private interest, negotiation between the beneficiaries and the private polluters. So everything has to be negotiated and policies have to be got accordingly. Next slide, please. So these are the countries which are really impacted by climate change in terms of crop production. As you can see, India is quite in the base of it, and many countries in Africa will be affected. The red spots are the main spots, and there will be a shifting comparative advantage, which I'm going to talk about soon. This is the scenario which will be there in 2070, by which time India has actually committed to carbon neutrality. Next slide, please. So what is the impact of export-driven agriculture? Because export-driven agriculture, according to the latest IPCC estimates, actually emit a lot of carbon, and largely because it's based on animal husbandry and intensive agriculture. So it is important to examine the factors which change land use patterns. Next slide, please. So we have to look at how growth really affects land use patterns, because economic growth and exports are really one of the mainstays of the economies of the South, and particularly agriculture and agricultural exports are one of the mainstays of the economies of the South. So what are the factors that lead to deforestation, and what are the products that leads to this deforestation? In the case of Africa, they are largely livestock, meat, and some cereals. In Latin America, the production of cattle meat accounts for more than 60% of the embodied deforestation. In Asia and Pacific, it's the production of palm oil and forestry products which leads to a third of the embodied deforestation. It's important for us to therefore focus on some of these areas to get the biggest, as they say, buck for the money. Next. So, what we know for now is that in 2050, we will have about 10 to 25% more land under agriculture than was the case in 2005. And most of the land will be from South America and Sub-Saharan Africa, which have the densest forests and the carbon sinks than at the moment. And the crops that will lead to it are soybeans and palm oil in some of these countries. Next. Also, what is very important, and this is why it's a matter of negotiation, climate change actually changes the comparative advantage of nations. For example, climate change will have a lot of impact on agricultural productivity. And for example, I've just taken a few examples from the South Asian region. Maize output could decline by 15% in this region. Wheat output in the Indo-Gangetic belt could decline by 50%. Milk and milk production by 15%. But Bhutan and Nepal would see an increase in their food production. At a global level, the advantage that developing countries and the global South enjoys at this moment in food production will move to the north. And what will happen, therefore, is that these countries will be able to produce many more crops which we were traditionally producing, and that would be the shifting comparative advantage. Next slide, please. What are the solutions? So the first is that we have to increase our yields. In the global South, the yields are on an average 20% less than the global yields. So the yields have to be increased so that we don't keep deforesting land. And this is a very important issue. In the case of maintaining food security, we have to rethink our approach. For example, how can we use the PDS stockpiles to export grain? At the moment, the WTO does not permit the export from PDS stockpiles, and PDS is the public distribution system. India uses this widely, but so does Bangladesh, and so do many countries in South Asia and in Africa, and because parastatals are really, they were a colonial invention, and they have been used in most countries which were under colonial rule. So what can we do? We have to loosen some of the rules, some of the existing trade rules, some of the existing approaches, and we have to look for a package of trade, technology, finance, and other measures to promote sustainable agriculture in the South. And why is this important? There are two reasons. One is that one, as I told you, the WTO doesn't permit exports from PDS, and this may become the mainstay of tomorrow. The second is drought-resistant varieties are patented. And because they are patented, it becomes very difficult for farmers to use them. So we, as Ajay was talking about this morning, what we need is a common pool of drought-resistant varieties so that all countries can avail them as and when they need them. Getting a patent pool for seeds, particularly because they involve trade secrets and they involve product patents, is not easy. But we should not be talking of technology transfer in the abstract. We should talk of actual mechanisms. And the actual mechanism could be a UPOV pooling of the seeds, especially drought-resistant seeds, so that they can be used by everyone. It could be drip irrigation, which needs to be popularized both through government extension programs and through international mechanisms. It could be many other mechanisms and technologies which are emerging at the moment and are not accessible to us to do it. Can we go to the last? I don't want to talk of India's challenges on energy and etc. because we have already talked about it. So I'll go to the conclusions. The problem is that we don't have a functioning market in the context of environmental degradation. There's no one who's willing to pay for the pollution, and nobody is talking of the balance between equity and efficiency. This equity is across nations, it's within a nation, it is across districts, it is, all this needs to be factored into a package for sustainable agriculture and sustainable development. Then the government has a crucial role in creating a market. For example, in the solar sector, in the absence of government support, solar modules would not be produced in India or deployed in the rural areas. The government stepped in as a very big player, and actually it was the government effort, subsidies plus feed-in tariffs which helped to get the cost down of solar energy in India. And this was a very important message for all of us, because we must recognize government has to play a role in decoupling growth from sustainable development. Because unless these markets are created, we don't have that possibility. Then in the case of trans-border global problems such as climate change, international cooperation in both finance and technology is required. And the issue that is important over here is the balance between equity and efficiency. Intergenerational equity, international equity, and within the country equity. And this balance is very important, because we cannot have efficiency in any of these areas without this equity. And here I'd like to reflect on something which has not been reflected on so far, is the principle of common but differentiated responsibility. And this is very important in international environment lawmaking, because unfortunately the principle of common but differentiated responsibility is going out of the window, whereas Agenda 21 and many other environmental lawmaking had this enshrined in it. So I think we have to go back to the principle of common but differentiated responsibility, talk of concrete ways in which technology and finance can be shared. Investment was one of the ways. For example, India is supposed to be the third largest investment destination for solar projects by 2025, which is right around the corner. But we have to find ways in which this can be distributed, a pooling of resources, a pooling of technologies, and we must look ahead. For example, in the silicon-based solar modules, China has a very clear advantage, very, very clear advantage in production. So what has Germany done? It has moved to hydrogen-based cell technologies. What can we do? Do the same. and also look at how we can reduce the cost in the existing technologies. So sustainable development is about the future. It's about future technological growth and technological progress. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your attention. I hope I didn't take too long.
Thank you so much for your excellent address, and you touched on sustainable agriculture. And I always say, we always think that agriculture is a clean activity, because what we were taught in our science class was carbon dioxide plus water gives us glucose molecule, and that is what is food. But as we move towards producing more and more, and I'm not at all blaming Green Revolution, rather the good point of Green Revolution was that for Bodlog, it was how he can take his technology spread to different parts of the world. So it was free exchange of germplasm, no IPR, it was only that it should reach the mankind in different parts. So that is what we started with. And today it is that even the genes are patented, the processes are patented, and that puts hurdle in taking technology to reach the end user. So, and that holds true for technologies in agriculture, that holds true for technologies in energy sector and so on. So it is very important that we have free source kind of on humanitarian ground, because everyone must realize there is only one planet to live in. When COVID occurred, we had no other place to go. Anyone could have tons of money, but they had to live on this very planet. So that is what is the reality that we have to face. One thing I would like to mention, because there are compulsions on part of the government as well. Like when we look at agriculture, we are stuck, because what we want food to be available at an affordable price, and therefore you are bound to take decisions which are not entirely in the interest of environment. For example, the distorted water pricing. In many states of India, you give electricity more or less free of cost. Now we are moving towards solar pumps, and again for solar pumping purposes, farmers are given subsidy so that they can get water for irrigation purposes. So what is also required is that we look at the policies, because, and one study which Terry had done, which was on that you meter how much of water is used by a farmer in Punjab. Maybe government should move towards subsidizing, giving them that money directly, so that farmer can then decide whether he would like to use that money for pumping water, for growing paddy, or he would like to shift to a crop which requires less of water and keep rest of money with him. So perhaps those sort of technologies. Similarly, a lot of money goes in subsidizing fertilizers. So what will it cost moving towards either nano fertilizer or in terms of farm mechanization, so that you are giving fertilizer exactly at the root zone rather than broadcasting and polluting both air and water, because part of it goes into the air as ammonia and part of it goes into the groundwater and pollutes it. So those are the things. So policies are always to be relooked at. What is happening today, what is more important today, and can we even think of having another category of food? We have organic, naturally produced, and usual food. Can we have another category of saying it's sustainably produced, and will there be buyers to pay a higher price for it? So I just want to leave you with this thought, and I would like to thank the excellent panelists who were with me. But before we close the session, if you have any quick question, maybe we can take 2 to 3 questions. Yeah.
First of all, thank you so much to all the panelists for the very eminent knowledge that they have shared with us. So my question is to Dr. Veena ma'am. Ma'am, as you talked about the sustainable agriculture, so if we talk about TOF, that is the trees outside forest, So is this concept related somewhere to the sustainable agriculture, or in some or the other way, can it help out in sustainable agriculture? I just wanted to know about it, whether it can be linked in a way or not.
Thank you. Thank you for that question, and that's a very interesting question. In fact, we had done, that means, my parent organization, which was UNCTAD, and we'd done some work on planted forests versus natural forests. And what is quite clear is that the tree cover provided by planted forests, or the carbon sinks provided by planted forests, in general, has a lower carbon absorption capacity than natural forests. This is because they planted in such a way that they have, the plantations do not have the density of natural forests. So yes, I think natural forests are a greater carbon sink, but where there is a trade-off between growth and environmental sustainability, it's natural that deforestation would take place. So what we have to ensure is that while the trees are replaced, we do as much as possible to stop deforestation also. So both go hand in hand. And I'll give you economic instruments that have been used, for example, in Brazil, to get this done, because they used to deforest a lot for paper production. Brazil deforested a lot and I'm talking of the 90s and the 2000s. And what was done subsequently is that a labeling scheme was introduced which said paper from planted forests, and that was paid a little bit of a premium. But those that said that paper from non-deforestation forests have been used, that was even better.
Ma'am, with your permission, I would just like to add, because trees outside forest is something which is becoming a buzzword in India today. What one is looking at, because we are talking of in doubling farmers' income. So what one is looking at, that in addition to the growing crops, if they can put trees outside or in their own agriculture fields, it becomes a second crop. And one is also looking at giving them carbon credits. So there are companies which are coming forward. So they will get, in a way, it will be triple income, because they'll get carbon credits by putting those trees. And third will be either as timber, or if it's a horticultural species, then they will be able to sell the fruit. And it becomes win-win, because the agriculture crop will take resources at a certain level and trees will take at a different level. And another fact which is now emerging, and in India, the study has shown that 90% of our timber requirement today are met from outside forest. So therefore, whatever you are using wood for, it's not coming from the forest, and it actually saves your forest once you go for planting trees outside forest. And another study, of course, you are very right that in forest, productivity is far greater, because you don't have a single layer, you also have multi-tier kind of an ecosystem. So lot many trees, you have climbers, you have trees, you have shrubs, and so on. So therefore, their productivity is far greater. But there is also another angle coming up, and that is that as we grow old, our metabolism becomes slow, so is with the trees. So they have fixed carbon dioxide, they have fixed CO2 in them. So these young trees, they also fix CO2 after a few years. It won't be, if I compare today versus 30 years, there is going to be a difference. But if I compare 10 years from now and 30-year tree, there will be comparison. So therefore, it's quite healthy to go for trees outside forest as well. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm from Kazakhstan, Laura Yerkesheva, and my question goes towards perhaps Vibha Dhawan or perhaps to Ajay Mathur, who is not here. Regarding you spoke about this co-development of technologies and the importance of that, and spoke about the connectivities. So as far as Central Asia is concerned, what are the priorities of India towards this region, part of the world, in terms of connectivity of what type of energy, like solar energy or hydrogen energy? What could be the expectation of that? Because we also heard from Professor Rashid Al-Zaman the geopolitics of hope. So it means, and the geopolitics of hope is nothing without infrastructure and connectivity. So what type of energy connectivity could be between India and Central Asia? Solar, hydrogen, or something else? Thank you.
Well, I'll put it this way, like even if you look at India, there are different kinds of renewable technologies depending on the area where you are. Rather, I'll share with you a very interesting project that Terry is doing, that is National Center of Excellence on Green Ports and Shipping. Now, what we are looking at, that you have to use mix depending on where the port is. Somewhere it is going to be solar because they have plenty of sunshine. Somewhere wind energy is very strong, so wind makes a case, and somewhere it is hydro. So when we look at Central Asia or southern part of the globe, what is important is we really have to look into what is my ultimate use of technology as well. When we talk of solar, it is not always that we want solar to go to the grid. We can even use solar for direct uses like putting cool chambers for mid-term or rather short-term storage of perishables. So it is direct use, so you don't invest. The other is that you are, so it is the usage, it is where you are situated. Now what is required, and we are repeatedly saying there are two things for any technology. One is technology development. That is where we are also looking at whether technology is already there. Don't reinvent the wheel. It is take the technology and try to fine tune it to your usage. And that is where the role of open kind of IPRs becomes very important. Second is that we don't require for many of the applications, when we talk of small and medium enterprises, they don't require technology to be that advanced. So why to go and then reverse engineering so that we bring down the cost of technology? Rather, we stop at that very moment, and the technology thus remains affordable for particular application. So, and then third and the most important one is appetite to adopt that technology. Because what happens, like when we talk of even solar, it is not something new. Even Terry was established to work on renewable energy in 1974. It's 50 years old journey. But that time, solar cookers, those were introduced without, there were two lacunas. One is at what time of the day we require the meal. And second was that we never trained manpower to repair those. I brought one, and once it had gone bad, it was, I had to take it 40 kilometers away to get it repaired. Then they said, you leave it and come after a week to take it back. Who can afford it? So the cost of taking it, and it's a bulky thing, so you can't carry it in public transport either. So it never worked. But then Terry had done another project which was Light a Billion Lives. So there it was, the lanterns, solar lanterns were not freely distributed. They were given to an entrepreneur, and that entrepreneur was also trained how to repair. So there is no downtime. So now when we are talking of any technology, solar technologies, are we training the user how to clean the solar panels? What if something goes wrong? Because they can't have alternate source of energy either. So training becomes extremely important. When we are talking of hydrogen, first of all, it is a new technology. Let's take it that way. who are taking decisions, perhaps who have never worked with hydrogen. Who is going to use it? It's the entire value chain. If it becomes a reality for cars, the person who is dispensing it should also understand what are the risk factors associated with it. That is where we all should come together. We don't have trained manpower, let's realize that. We need core staff. Thereafter, we need to train, and not just from the country which is first establishing, the country which is also going to import it, they also should know how to use it. So human resource development becomes very crucial. It's an expensive technology. We will have to work and reduce the price. Till that time, let's train our people and let's have infrastructure, let's have co-development of technology, and then start adopting the technology.
Hello. Yeah. Myself, Saurabh, and I'll just add what you have narrated just now. I'm adding to it. See, when you are talking about Central Asia or India and the technology or the nature of the energy that can be used, it is really a very big area for discussion. And I'll give you just a small example. India and Nepal, India and Bhutan. Bhutan, Nepal, they are having much more of hydrogen. We are having more of solar. The issue of solar is availability for 8 hours, and that also not at its peak. So we need to have technology so that it can be elongated for the 24 hours. So one concept is storage. Storage has two parts. One is battery, or it can be hydro. So hydro storage has come to aid to India. So now with Nepal, etc., coming on Indian exchange for selling powers as well as purchasing power, we are getting hydro generation from Nepal at a time when solar is not available. So both these technology, I mean, it depends upon the geography, the availability of it. Sun is not going to set throughout the world. That is why our PM have given this vision of one sun, one world. So we can harness it. The only thing is, as ma'am has indicated, the technology, the issues involved with the technology, and bringing the cost of the technology.
Thank you so much. I'm sure there are other questions, but we can take it during lunch hour, one-to-one. And I'd like to close the session now. Big thanks to all the panelists and organizers. I enjoyed it, and I'm sure all of you also enjoyed it. Can we take it at lunchtime, because I think we are very late?
We have now come to the end of this amazing first session with a presentation of gifts to our participants. Thank you, Dr. Dhawan, Tan Sri Datuk Ong Ti Kiat, Professor Zaman, and Dr. Jha. We would like the audience to give a round of applause, please. Our next session is on innovation and incentivizing investment in green technology to sustain industry. The participants are the following. The session's chairperson, Mr. Pierre Fion Ashida, is First Counselor, Head of Research and Innovation of the Delegation of the European Union to India. He has nearly 3 decades of experience with EU institutions in Japan and at the EU headquarters in Brussels in the field of digital libraries, tech providers, and policy makers for international cooperation. He is coordinating initiatives in India with the EU's 27 members and associated states for the EU Horizon Europe Research Programme and mobility programs like Erasmus. Welcome, Mr. Pierre Fion Ashida. He will be followed by Dr. Prashant Goswami, Chairman, Institute of Frontier Science and Application, one of India's leading environmental scientists. He was lead author of Assessment Report 5 in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. A visiting professor at École Normale Supérieure, Paris, Dr. Goswami is a computational geoscientist, climatologist, and was the director of the National Institute of Science, Technology and Development Studies, New Delhi. He was also previously with the Fourth Paradigm Institute and is known for his work on tropical atmospheric variability across time